This is Akko, about 8 miles north of modern Haifa. It was an important city in antiquity on the Mediterranean coast, although it is only mentioned once in the Old Testament. Similarly, it is mentioned once in the New Testament as a place where Paul spent a day at the end of his third missionary journey, while en route to Caesarea from Tyre. The ancient Old Testament city of Akko, renamed Ptolemais in the New Testament period, is barely visible east of the bay on higher land. The buildings and harbor facilities that are prominent in this video date from the Persian period, circa 400 BC. The modern seawall was constructed on the ruins of much earlier seawalls, dating to the 5th century BC. Many of the walls seen surrounding the city, and some of the buildings, date to the Crusader period, around AD 1150. Most of the Mediterranean coast of Israel is sandy and smooth, as seen here, and not favorable as ports for shipping. The infrequent natural harbors, like those at Akko, Dor, and Jaffa, are not remarkable and can account for why Israel never achieved notice as a naval power. 21 miles south of Akko is this ancient city of Dor. As Dor's modest but protected harbor comes into view, one can see why the city became an important coastal port in the Assyrian, Persian, and Hellenistic periods. By the 4th century AD, Dor was in ruins. It was rebuilt and briefly occupied by the Crusaders in the 11th century AD, after which it again fell into disrepair. The western part of the ancient city of Dor can be seen in this video. The excavated areas closest to the sea are the earliest occupation levels, dating to a time before the conquest. By the time of the divided kingdom, the city was under the control of the Israelites and became the major port of the northern nation of Israel. The camera flies around a maritime area that centers on a 250-meter-long bay that was used as a secondary harbor throughout most of the site's long history. The primary bay, 750 meters wide, can be seen south and behind the peninsula. In ancient times, the primary bay was protected by a series of small islands behind which ships safely anchored, while transferring merchandise to smaller ships for transportation to the city. This is Caesarea Maritima. The camera begins at the ruins of the theater seating 4,000 spectators. Next, it flies over a promontory that has the ruins of an impressive palace. Moving north, the camera views the colossal amphitheater that seated 10,000 people. This city was designed and built during the reign of Herod the Great, just before Jesus' birth. Inland from the amphitheater are excavations of a bathhouse complex under the flat roofs and other commercial areas. The modern buildings that next come into view are on the foundations of a temple Herod dedicated to Augustus. The camera then follows along the breakwater that is constructed over a similar one built by Herod. It enclosed a large artificial harbor of about 2 acres. The clip ends with a view of the fortified medieval city, Inner Quay, and the harbor areas. Here the camera pans over the excavations of a palace complex of Caesarea Maritima, where Paul was believed to have been held prisoner. The flat area with a few columns is a swimming pool. Next, the camera flies over the southern end of the amphitheater built by Herod. This amphitheater was almost 1,000 feet long, 150 feet wide, and seated about 10,000 people. It gave a picturesque location to watch chariot races and other games. Next are seen archaeological excavations of a large bathhouse complex built after Herod died, along with administrative and storage complexes that supported the city's shipping economy. Caesarea was a planned city that lacked few amenities and was the home of the centurion Cornelius, the first Roman convert to Christianity in Acts 10. The helicopter then begins to circle the Crusader walls and dry moat enclosing the medieval city that was considerably smaller than the city in Herod's time. Since Caesarea Maritima had no rivers or springs, drinking water was brought from the southern slopes of Mount Carmel, just visible in the distance. Plastered channels over arches, like those seen here, carried the water many miles from its source in the northern part of the country. It has been estimated that this aqueduct carried approximately 900 cubic meters of water per hour into the city. As can be seen, the city was built along a desolate section of coast that had no natural harbors. The city took 12 years to build and was completed about 10 or 9 BC, and was renowned for the splendor of its buildings. It soon became the headquarters of the Roman government in Palestine. This magnificent city, with its engineering marvels, such as this impressive aqueduct, is consistent with the other ambitious architectural projects Herod constructed around the country. The greenery in the foreground of this video marks modern Jaffa and its small natural harbor. Today, Jaffa is a suburb of Tel Aviv, seen in the distance, with 2.3 million residents, 1/3 of Israel's population. Until AD 1948, Tel Aviv was only a tiny garden suburb of Jaffa. Since there are so few natural harbors along the Palestinian coast, as Tel Aviv's sandy beaches and coastline confirms, Joppa became a center of trade and port for ancient Canaan and Israel. The prophet Jonah departed from here. Peter stayed in the house of Simon the tanner in Joppa, where he received a vision that Gentiles could be admitted into the church. As the camera moves north from Jaffa, the hotels with their beaches and the downtown area of modern Tel Aviv are clearly visible. This is a view of the broad, fertile Philistine plain that stretches over 50 miles along the Mediterranean coast, from just north of Tel Aviv to south of Gaza. It takes its name from the Philistines, who settled in this area about 1200 BC. The plain is about 10 miles wide at the northern end and 25 miles wide in the south. The Philistine plain had a major road running north to south through it, generally where the modern highway in the video is seen. This was the principal route taken by traders and armies as they moved between Africa, Asia, and Europe. The landscape is flat to slightly rolling, with only 16 to 20 inches of rain a year. Grain is the major agricultural product and explains why the Philistines may have worshipped the grain god Dagon. To the left of the road are the ruins of ancient Bet Shemesh. It is in the Sphela, a geographical transitional zone separating the Philistine plain from the hill country of Judah, seen in the distance. The low, broad valley next to Bet Shemesh is the Sorek. Grain and grapes are grown in these broad alluvial valleys between low rolling hills. This video, taken from the south side of the Sorek, shows the valley's eastern terminus, the Sorek riverbed, and a road that leads to the Philistine plain. 7 months after the Philistines captured the Ark at the Battle of Aphek, they returned it on a cart that moved along this route. The Sorek was also the scene of Samson's exploits. Delilah's home was somewhere in this valley. A flight over the hill and ruins of Zorah, Samson's hometown, begins this video. It was from here that the Danites departed to spy out and conquer the northern city of Laish, later called Dan. Next, the Sorek Valley, where the buildings are located, is seen from the north. The camera then turns slowly west to provide a view of the valley all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Elah Valley, 5 miles south of the Sorek Valley. The camera flies east along the southern edge of the valley near Sukkot, and on the horizon in the distance can be seen the Judean hills near Bethlehem. An ancient road from the Philistine plain to Bethlehem ran through the valley, and the modern road follows the same route. In the brown cultivated valley, just before 2 white satellite discs seen in the upper left corner of the screen, is a line of vegetation that marks a creek bed. This stream could be the location where David gathered his 5 stones and met Goliath. This view of the Elah Valley is west of the previous video and is Ephes Dammon, mentioned in 1 Samuel 17 in the David and Goliath account. This is where the Philistines camped as they confronted Saul's army. In the distance is the area where David met Goliath, and beyond that, the Judean hill country on the horizon. The camera circles over the archaeological ruins of Azekah on the hilltop in the foreground. At 1,200 feet above sea level and in the middle of the Shvela, Azekah's commanding location made it visible for miles around. Jeremiah cites it and Lachish as among the last remaining fortified cities that stood against the invading Babylonian forces of Nebuchadnezzar. Azekah was captured by Nebuchadnezzar shortly before the fall of Jerusalem. Although disputed, many archaeologists accept Tel Zafit, seen here, as the location of biblical Gath, the hometown of Goliath. It is located where the Elah Valley enters the Shvela. The site's height dominates ancient roads into the Judean hills and through the Shvela. The ark was taken to this city during its sojourn with the Philistines, and David took refuge here when he first fled from Saul. The city's acropolis was on the hill's summit. This unusual series of holes and caves are, in fact, chalk quarries. Here, the natural deposits of chalk are covered by a very hard surface crust. Quarrymen would cut a circular opening in the hard surface, and once the softer chalk was reached, it was removed. As the quarrymen dug down, the underground pit was enlarged, making bell-shaped caverns. Over time, the ceilings of some of these large underground complexes collapsed, as seen in the video. The quarried chalk was used as a raw material in the manufacture of lime and cement. The Romans also used it as a subsurface for their extensive road network. The area in the previous video is adjacent to these ruins, known as Marissa. The green vegetation indicates that the time of year is late spring, soon after the winter rains have ceased. In the summer, the area becomes brown and desolate. The camera follows the location of the western wall of the upper city. The Judean hills can be seen in the far distance. The video concludes with a good view of the excavated tower in the northwestern corner of the upper city that dates to 300 BC and was built over the ruins of earlier buildings. Most scholars believe that this site, known as Maresha Gath, was the home of the prophet Micah. It is very near the location of the previous 2 videos in the southern part of the Shvela. It was among the cities Rehoboam fortified in 2 Chronicles. The city was captured by Sennacherib in his campaign against Judah in 701 BC. The camera begins its tour at the southeastern corner of the city and generally follows the outline of the walls, which were about 10 feet thick, around the southern and western edge of the hill on which the city was built. Above and to the right of the T intersection of the white dirt roads at the bottom of the screen was the Western Gate. This site was excavated at the beginning of the 20th century, making it difficult to define many details from this aerial view. This 30-acre mound, or tell, is the ancient city of Lachish. The video begins at the southwest corner of the city, where the main gate was located. It was here that Sennacherib in 701 BC broke through the walls. Archaeologists have confirmed that the site was protected by fortifications from the time of the patriarchs. Joshua defeated Lachish's army during the conquest. From its strategic location, Lachish commanded a major portion of the coastal plain, seen in the distance, and the international highway that passed nearby. This video continues the previous view of Lachish. The camera circles the mound's southern end where the outline of the walls can be faintly seen below the crest. A dark spot marks a 145-foot deep well above the walls. Next can be seen a large depression on the crest that may have been a futile attempt by Lachish's defenders to gain an alternate water supply. The city's impressive height becomes apparent from this view. The clip concludes with an excellent close-up view of the southwestern gate. If the viewer pauses over the gate complex, the outer gate and access ramp can be ascertained. To enter the city, one passed through the outer gate, climbed the ramp, and turned into the open court to reach a three-chambered inner gate, the largest found in Israel. This is the Negev, that means dry or south in Hebrew. It is a zone that in the Bible served as the southern boundary of Judah and the entrance to the hill country. As the scene shows, the region is arid and can only support minimal agriculture because it rains less than 8 inches per year. In the Bible and today, the region's economy is pastoral, based primarily on the raising of sheep, goats, and camels. The entire zone is covered with a layer of wind-deposited brown soil called less. With the first rains each year, the soil forms a crust that makes subsequent rains run off into extensive gullies, or wadis. These are the excavated remains of Beersheba, one of the principal biblical cities in the Negev. Bridges mark 2 dry riverbeds, or wadis, next to the ruins of the ancient city. During the rainy season, these wadis supplemented the city's well by channeling water into a large cistern inside the walls. In the video are highways that from ancient times marked this location as an international crossroads. Here, settlers on the hill were at the fork of 2 wadis that provided natural protection, water, cultivatable alluvial soil, and access to the main crossroads. The modern city of Beersheba can be seen several miles away in the distance. Beersheba is frequently mentioned in the Bible as the southern border of the Promised Land, Dan being the northern limit. This flyover gives a bird's-eye view of the extensive excavations at Tel Beersheba. The gate and wall were constructed in the same place and along the same lines throughout the city's existence. Visible on the summit are ruins from the Old Testament time of the monarchy and divided kingdoms, although there is evidence of occupation to 3000 BC. The city wall can be seen in several places as the camera circles the site. Beersheba shows central planning with streets and buildings constructed in an oval that follows the site's topography. The square dark shaft is the 50-foot deep approach to cisterns mentioned in the previous video. At the base of the hill, below the shaft, is part of a revetment wall. The video ends with a quick look at the city's 4-chambered gate in the reddish-colored area. This view is in the eastern part of the Negev that was dominated by the ancient city of Arad, seen on the hill. As the camera pans the area, it captures typical Negev landscape and the southern Judean hill country in the distance. The paved highway passing by the east side of the Tel follows an ancient roadway that led north to Hebron. This illustrates Arad's strategic location as a protector of the southeastern approach to Judah and the hill country. This is the highest part of the ruins of Arad, where Solomon erected a fortress that was rebuilt several times before its final destruction in 586 BC. As the camera flies over the excavated fortress, its wall and a 2-chambered entrance gate can be clearly seen. Here, archaeologists found a shrine, water system, residential structures, and storehouses. The shrine was similar in plan to the tabernacle and temple in Jerusalem. The sanctuary went out of use before the final destruction of the city, probably in the days of either Hezekiah or Josiah. Now the camera follows the wall of a small portion of the excavated area of Lower Arad, The lower city dates to at least 2600 BC, when it was mysteriously abandoned. The wall is almost 8 feet thick and 4,000 feet long. On the hill in the distance can be seen the higher Israelite fortress constructed by Solomon. The wall has rectangular and semicircular towers. The city's network of streets and functional districts indicates that it had a centrally imposed plan. The northern biblical Sinai is vast, dry, and seemingly uninteresting. It is into this region that God led the Israelites for 38 years after they failed to enter the Promised Land, as described in Numbers chapter 14. But the area is also rich in geological history. This view is a flyover of one of the several unique geological formations in the northern Sinai, often called craters or Maktesh in Hebrew. However, a Maktesh is not an impact crater from a meteorite or the remains of an extinct volcano. Rather, they are geologic domes that have eroded from within. Over time, they collapse and ultimately form the spectacular basin seen here and in very few other places in the world. The area east of here is barren and wild desert, cut occasionally by dry riverbeds and gorges, including a fierce wilderness called Zin that forms the southern border of Canaan and Judah. The deep canyon visible in the video, called Ein Avdat, is one of the wadis that cuts through the desolate wilderness of Zin. It drains the region's scant rainfall east to the Arabah. The Bible refers to this area as that great and terrible wilderness. Because of their lack of faith in God to bring them into the Promised Land, the Israelites had to travel and live in this desolate area for 38 years until that unfaithful generation died. A closer look at Ein Avdat, a natural spring that forms a great canyon slicing through the Sinai on its way east to the Arabah. The starkness of the region and limited water resources impact viewers as they consider how the Israelites struggled to survive in the bleak Sinai. They would have perished without God's miraculous provision of water and food in the form of manna. The Roman and Byzantine ruins visible on the hilltop are from the 4th through 6th centuries A.D. and near Ein Avdat. This hill and its city is alongside important trade routes that came from the east. It provided a resting station for the caravans that moved from Petra and Eilat to Gaza. During the time of Jesus, it was a military camp for the Nabatean Camel Corps that protected the trade roads. The Romans and Byzantines subsequently occupied the site for the same reasons. The large square area without columns on the Acropolis is the remains of a fortress. Also, churches, temples, and residences first built by the Romans can be seen. All these were rebuilt by the Byzantines after the Romans lost control of the area. The site was destroyed and abandoned during the Arab conquest of Palestine, AD 636. In addition to showing interesting views of the ancient city, this video illustrates the essence of the Sinai region, both geographically and economically. The modern town seen in the video is Mitzpah Ramon. It sits at the northern rim of the largest Maktesh, or crater, in Israel, known as Maktesh Ramon. This area is now the center of 2 popular nature preserves and a geologist's paradise, with fossils, rocks, and volcanic formations. It is also the home to a wide variety of desert animals and plants, some of which are found in few other places. The clip begins with a flyover of the city, and then the camera turns east, flying parallel to the northern rim. An observation deck and tower on the edge of the depression can be seen. From here, visitors get a stunning view of the Maktesh. In the distance, behind the city, the barren wilderness of the northern Sinai region contrasts with the lush greenery of the city. Here, the helicopter flies over part of the northern rim of Maktesh Ramon, and the camera is pointed south. This crater, or Maktesh, is the largest in the world. It is 25 miles long, 5 miles across at its widest point, and 1,650 feet deep. Although it looks barren, archaeological treasures are there because a major trade road passed through it. Toward the end of the video, an observation platform is seen, from which the visitors can contemplate the stark beauty and loneliness of this wilderness where the Israelites sojourned for 38 years. The wilderness of Paran is in the central part of the northern biblical Sinai. The boundaries of Paran are uncertain but can be inferred from various Old Testament sources. The Israelites camped in the wilderness of Paran, and Moses dispatched 12 men from here to search out the land of Canaan. The Bible reports in Numbers chapter 13, verse 26, that they returned 40 days later to the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. Although the region appears foreboding, travelers crossed it in antiquity when going to Egypt or other points east and west. Ishmael received an Egyptian wife while in the Paran. David, apparently in mourning, went to Paran after Samuel died. Toward the end of the clip, the camera crosses a dry wadi, or stream bed, that drains this region eastward towards the Arabah, seen in the distance. The reddish color of the hills in this video announces that the camera is at Timnah, a horseshoe-shaped valley that has been exploited for its deposits of copper ore over many centuries. It is about 19 miles north of the Gulf of Aqaba and just west of the Arabah. The mines in this basin are believed to be among the oldest known in the world. God promised He was going to bring the Israelites into a land out of whose hills you can dig copper, certainly an apt description of this place. The helicopter circles over a small line of rocks and whitish area seen at the base of the imposing vertical rock columns. This marks the excavations of a temple to the Egyptian goddess Hathor, worshipped by miners. Many camps and smelting furnaces have been found in this valley, attesting to the intensive mining that occurred here for hundreds of years. These vertical cliffs at Timnah, popularly called Solomon's Pillars, are symbolic of the fact that mining copper ore was hazardous and hot work. Vertical shafts of up to 115 feet deep were dug to extract the ore. Archaeological examination of the workers' camps have resulted in several important finds, including a gilded copper serpent, reminiscent of the bronze serpent God instructed Moses to make while in the wilderness. There is no evidence that the Israelites ever visited this area during the Exodus. However, this fascinating place and its artifacts does remind us of the many activities that took place in the Sinai during the periods of the patriarchs, Exodus, and conquest. The camera flies north along the western section of the Arabah. The Arabah is a shallow valley, about 110 miles long and up to 25 miles wide, between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. Visible on the horizon is the wilderness of Edom. Scanty rainfall and few springs give the land a dismal yellow appearance. The Israelites traveled south through this foreboding landscape on a 100-mile forced detour on their way to the Promised Land, after being denied permission to cross at Punan. Contrasting the bleak landscape seen here, the prophet Isaiah compared this bleak scene to the same Arabah with flowers blooming and well-watered streams, as symbolic of the earth's overwhelming joy at the Lord's return. In this view, the camera begins its flight looking north and east, showing in the distance the southern extent of the Arabah. It next pans over parts of Eilat, Israel's modern port city, on the Gulf of Aqaba. Here, the Arabah is narrow, and the mountains of Midian in the modern state of the Kingdom of Jordan can be clearly seen in the east. Somewhere near and north of here in the Arabah Valley, the Israelites crossed to the east and then traveled north toward Moab, bypassing Edom, while heading for the Promised Land. Observable toward the end of the video are the outskirts of the rapidly growing city of Eilat, a portion of the bay with ocean-going freighters at anchor, and, in the distance at the base of the mountains, the Jordanian city of Aqaba. At the water's edge in the distance, the mountains of Midian in modern Jordan are first seen. Then the camera slowly pans to show the bustling commercial city of Eilat, whose economy is heavily dependent upon tourism and international shipping. Next, we see some of the luxury hotels that cluster along Israel's narrow shoreline, and beyond them is Eilat's harbor, where several ocean-going cargo ships are waiting to be unloaded. Somewhere near here, along the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, was Solomon's shipyard and port city, Ezion-Geber. Later, during the divided kingdom, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, allied himself with Ahaziah, king of Israel, and together they used Ezion-Geber as a shipyard and port. As the video concludes, the camera turns to the southwest, and the Sinai Mountains in modern Egypt come into view.